refugees. But I think a lot of people, me included, really, really, really don't understand what a refugee looks like, what their life is like. And I guess there's no one, this is a typical life of a refugee. But can you give us some insight into, let's take some of this, like Syrian refugees in the UAE where you are. What's life like for them now?
Well, I mean, in the UAE, there are no refugees here because the refugee doesn't exist as a term of migrant here. But the Syrians who are here have work visas like I do.
Okay.
But they're vulnerable. The ones I will focus on initially are the ones in Jordan, Lebanon, well, not Lebanon so much, Jordan and Turkey and Iraq. So again, as you say, there is no particular stereotype of a refugee. A refugee is someone who had to cross a border because of conflict or because of climate change or because of persecution in their home country. So if we look at the Syria crisis, before the war, 20% of Syrians had university degrees. So it was a pretty educated population. So they do come with skills. Yes, the education was in Arabic, but a lot of the more educated Syrians do speak English. What do the lives look like? Again, vast difference. Yeah. So because of the type of work I'm thinking about, initially my target are the more educated ones, the ones who had been to university before the crisis, or the ones who managed to go through university whilst being a refugee. And also considering, the crisis is going, this is 2020 will be the 10th year, I think, 10th year of the crisis. So there's almost a whole generation of people who finished, who didn't finish high school, who would have been at university, during the time of the conflict. So a lot of people have sort of missed out, but the international community has done a lot, providing lots of training. And this is really, and the partners we work with, some great coding boot camps. So providing refugees the training to be software developers, app developers, coders, whatever, that, all those technical skills. So those are the ones we look at. Their life. So when people fled, initially fled, of course they didn't expect to flee for the duration in which they had. So a lot of people use their savings to rent apartments in Amman or in Beirut or in Istanbul or Gaziantep. There's a big community in Gaziantep as well. But of course, after years, their resources did run out, and a lot of refugees do work, but because of the restrictions, they work mostly work in the informal sector, which means low wages, underemployed, and just the conditions under which they work are questionable. So there is talent, but the talent isn't quite being utilized in the communities in which they live. I would say Turkey perhaps does the best job because Turkey has the most lenient rules in terms of allowing refugees to work. So refugees can get work permits in Turkey, but there's a quota of one Syrian for 10 Turkish nationals employed by a company. So this means that a lot of refugees still do work informally because these barriers are still quite great. But Turkey does allow entrepreneurship. So there are a lot of Syrian entrepreneurs doing work in Turkey. So Turkey has welcomed many Syrian businesses. It's hard to say what the average refugee looks like because Palestinians who've been exiled for over 70 years still consider themselves refugees, even though they look like you or I, they speak like you and I, and they perhaps present themselves as no different to you or I, but they still can't return to the place which they call home. So
it's dangerous, isn't it? It's dangerous to stereotype a refugee because
it's dangerous. Yes,
like any population, there's complete diversity of personality, of value sets, of education, and so you cannot stereotype, can you?
Yeah, we can't stereotype. I mean, the Kosovans were refugees in the 90s, so there is no stereotype. Now Venezuelans are fleeing, and Venezuela is a very rich country. huge oil resources. Venezuelans were they were a wealthy population. Yes, there was corruption, but there was what people would consider the typical refugee, but they can't go back to their home.
Yeah.